the little monologue earlier.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Well, thanks. I always find it very...
No, you actually kind of touched on a number of different things that I kind of think about quite frequently.
Good. Well, that makes me happy. At least I had some positive influence.
The whole idea of like systems and like going back to like tribes and like this whole idea like we're still dealing with the systems set up from that a long time ago. So.
Now I'm going to bring this over here in case I need to do any emergency messing. And I'm going to say, how did that dog get in here? Hello, Luna.
She followed me in, she did.
No fluffing. Right, well, welcome Brandon. This is everybody.
Hello.
I think... now, I don't know if the speaker view bit is working. It seems not to be, but so maybe I'll just leave it on the gallery view. So I don't really have much of an introduction for Brandon, except for my little story. And then I'm going to let Brandon do as much talking as I can handle. I met Brandon quite a long time ago. And I wanted to meet Brandon because he was building a straw bale house. And I thought that took a lot of cojones and must be a huge challenge. But Brandon is also growing vegetables. His wife, partner, Grace, is teaching yoga. And I think they've made a huge impact on the local community in Ireland and basically, you know, set an example for us to follow. So what we're going to do is we're just going to have a little chat. It's nearly time for Campari.
Grand.
But I thought maybe, Brandon, the way to start was maybe how we nearly started over the weekend, because that was really fascinating. And for me, why people change or suddenly break out from the mold is fascinating. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about
my early past history.
You know, with the change, how it happened, why it happened, and what brought you to the bogs of Ireland.
Well, I wouldn't say Ireland is the bogs at all whatsoever. It's a different experience, certainly, after living in basically Silicon Valley before, like, I actually remember Silicon Valley when it was actually a lot of agriculture.
Wow.
So there's like a lot of apricot trees. Like basically the housing estate that I grew up in would have been an apricot orchard.
Wow.
And a few walnuts and stuff like that. Like, so as I was growing up, like across the street, which was eventually got turned into a primary school, was a big apricot orchard. And then there was a stream. And I remember there being like agricultural space between the various municipalities. Now, by the time I was 16, that was gone.
By the time you were 16?
Yeah.
So that's a long time ago. That's in the 70s something.
Oh, yeah. 70s, early 80s, around 80. Like, so I was born in 65. Like, yeah, so around 1980, like that was gone. Like IBM was in, the whole silicon thing was starting in, and most of the agricultural, like it was all like canneries and stuff like that, like fruit canneries and stuff, like all that was gone. Like, and there was just like this, suddenly you just become cognitive of this idea that you can't actually see across the valley because of the smog. Because of the smog? Yeah. Like you used to have a nice, you could easily, because I was on one side of the valley, and then the Santa Cruz Mountains were on the other side. You could very easily see the Santa Cruz Mountains, But then, like, all of a sudden, you couldn't see across it anymore and stuff like that. Like, so I grew up in, a suburban area, always lived in an urban area and stuff like that. Like, and then I moved over here after meeting Grace. And she wanted to move back here, so we came back here. I met Grace in San Francisco, yeah. So I find it. People ask me like, what's it must be kind of very different and all the rest of the type of stuff. Like, it's not too bad. Everybody speaks the same language. Culturally, it's kind of somewhat similar and stuff like that. Like, but kind of, I suppose, because I moved from, say, the city. Like, I lived in San Francisco last, being there, and then we moved out to kind of like moved to Cork for a little while, and then now we live in kind of the rural part of Carlow, and it's kind of like, oh well, it's an interesting thing. I used to get woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning by fighting prostitutes. Now I just get woken up in the morning by
Fighting
pheasants fighting with each other.
lovely.
So like that's the change. Like it's kind of a different thing. It's nice. It's different. It is different. But I suppose 35 years of urban living and stuff like that. It's nice to have a bit of a change and stuff like that as well.
I had no idea. I had no idea you were such a townie, if I can put it that way.
Oh, yeah, big time, yeah. That would have been like 5 years. I never even left the San Francisco Bay Area. I know that for a fact. Like,
Okay.
never even left it. Like, oh yeah, I was glued to San Francisco, really, in a lot of ways, like in the Bay Area and stuff like that. Yeah, definitely.
So was there a time when you decided, because you obviously don't live the normal life,
No.
and you obviously don't have the sort of the standard values of your, white Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, whatever it is, the WASP, your white American or your white European. It's, it's what I was talking about. Get the mortgage, have the family, do the, you have a, go to church on Sunday. You don't have that routine.
No.
So was there a time when you had a routine, a time when you realized that, wait a minute, I don't like doing exams anymore, or this job sucks?
Well, I suppose in some ways it was kind of slightly gradual and stuff like that. Like I would have.
So was there something in you right from the beginning?
Well, okay, I think kind of really the main thing, and I'm just going to tell you a little story here of where I kind of, I did a painting of this. There's actually a large painting at home about it. But when I was 4 years old in 1969, right, and in America you have drive-in movies. There'd be a screen and a screen and a screen, and you'd go in the car, right? So when I was 4 years old, we went to the drive-in theater, right, to the cinema. And the first showing was The Aristocats, which is a Disney movie, cats, type of thing. I haven't ever really seen it since. I don't even...
we've definitely seen it.
Yeah, it's a fine movie, like it's a classic old Disney type of a thing, right?
Yeah.
So that was the first feature, and that was grand. And then after that was Easy Rider.
Well, like the same year?
Well, it came out in 1969.
Oh, so like the movie after Aristocrats?
After Aristocrats, yeah.
The next movie show?
Yeah, so it was kind of like, okay, here we're all going to the cinema. There's a kind of probably a thing where it's like, okay, we're going to have this one for the kids first. Then they go to sleep in the back seat of the car, and this is the one for the adults, right? Cool. So I'm supposed to be asleep in the back seat of the car, but I distinctly remember like constantly being told, Brandon, go to sleep, Brandon, go to sleep, Brandon, go to sleep, because I'm watching over the top of the back seat, Easy Rider going on, right? And I'm like, oh, click. Like I'm quite interested in it. Like there's just something going on there. I don't know what's going on. I'm 4 years old, but I'm just like, wow, this is like, now. I did not see Easy Rider again until I was working as a nurse and for the Veterans Administration in the States. And this was after I'd gotten involved in punk rock, as we were kind of talking on the phone and stuff like that. Like,
they didn't know about that.
No, but that's a different story. But it was kind of an oddly slow night, because usually you'd be run off your head but it was an oddly slow night. One of my patients in a private room was watching Easy Rider on the TV. And so I was kind of looking after other patients and then popping in and watching Easy Rider on the TV. And it was like, all of a sudden, that whole thing just clicked. And it's like, oh, now I know what happened to me. Because it was like, oh, I see what's going on now. But I was old enough to relate to it at that point. Like, And for me, I think what happened when I was watching Easy Rider and the whole concept of like counterculture and all that type of stuff, like kind of hit a nerve, like it was like a little seed that kind of got planted in there.
Well, like the movie was not like your life. What is that? It looks
Oh no,
interesting.
yeah, but it was just kind of like, okay, this is now I grew up in a typically kind of like working class American family and stuff like that. Like, we kind of like my parents had drifted away from the church for a little while, and then we started going back to church when I was 13. It was a typical kind of it was an evangelical American type thing. My parents are fairly conservative. Most of my relatives are fairly conservative and stuff like that. So I grew up in that type. I went to a evangelical high school, so 4 years of Bible and stuff like that. And I have great respect for like the Bible and religion and various religions and stuff like that as well. Like, and upon graduating high school, I would have considered myself a moderate Republican, really, at the time, like, right? And then kind of what happened is my parents weren't going to allow me to apply for financial assistance or financially assist me to go to the church college, right? So all my friends went off to the church college and I was left at the community college. And I was getting kind of tired of listening to, I was kind of left to my own devices, I suppose you might say. And I was getting kind of tired of listening to standard, what you might call white boy rock and roll. So like Van Halen and Def Leppard and stuff like that, like, you know. And so I started listening to the college stations, which were all playing like punk and new wave and that type of stuff, like, right?
So is punk like Suzi Quatro and Sid Vicious and those six? What sort of? I mean, I'm just.
Well, it would have been really classified as at this point, like thing. I suppose it would be in the post-punk time because this would have been about like '84.
Okay.
You know, so like the Pistols were already gone.
Yeah.
Most of the bands that I ended up really getting into actually were done. I didn't actually see like a lot of those bands, like say the Buzzcocks, the Damned, Stiff Little Fingers.
Okay.
Until probably the 90s. There was this big kind of like resurgence into it. But I was into like, you see the Ramones all the time. The Ramones are always playing, like, you know. But a lot of the old bands had kind of broken up and stuff like that. Like, and then there was like hardcore, that was kind of what was going on, like, but I was more into like kind of the more, I suppose what you might call classic rock, punk rock type stuff, like the old school stuff. But anyways, I started to listen to like punk rock music, and then I went to a gig in Palo Alto with a couple of people that I was kind of introduced to by a classmate of mine because I was in nursing school at the time. Okay. And we went there. Met a couple of other guys that I was actually in high school with, which was kind of interesting.
And they'd taken a different...
They had made a different turn, but they are a couple of years behind me. Okay. And so we kind of just formed like a little group and stuff like that. But it was at that point then that I started getting... Because prior to that, like, it was mostly kind of like church and conservative concepts on society and stuff like that. Like, and so then I was starting to get kind of different ideas about society and what's happening and that type of stuff, and different ideas, like we were talking about like Nicaragua and stuff like that, like,
right,
you know, and you wouldn't really be thinking about it too much, you know, and certainly it wouldn't be something you'd be thinking was like, oh, that's like horribly wrong, especially from like a moderate Republican point of view, because that's what they were doing. And then you start to get to especially like, oh, well, actually, like, that's kind of, yeah, that's not right. Okay. And you start to get these kind of different ideas and stuff like that, like,
through the music.
Well, through music and also the people
around the music.
Yeah, because I'm meeting new people with different ideas that are coming from different perspectives, and I mean, you always had that kind of like section of, say, like the punk rock type, who might be the quintessential concept of like, okay, well, da 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 da. But then you also had the intellectual side of things, where you had people who actually did a lot of reading, were quite aware of a lot of things and stuff like that, like, you know. And so you'd kind of start to, you just converse with people and you're like, oh yeah, okay, that's an interesting idea. And so you'd kind of develop things. So I suppose it was at that point then that there was that slippery kind of slope into what would be more of a liberal concept of things.
So that would have been late 80s.
Yeah, 84, 85, kind of thereabouts, like, yeah. And then developing there on after, because then I got my nursing, decided I didn't really like that, and decided to go back to art school. Or to go to art school. I can't say back to art school because I wasn't there in the first place. Like, so I decided to go to art school, and then you start meeting more people as well. Okay. You know, so you develop ideas and stuff like that. So I suppose I'd always been at that point then, from there on forwards, involved in the kind of an alternative concept of things, and you know.
Okay, and you just lived then, I suppose, in a different, you sort of just changed boats a little bit, but still going along. It wasn't like a break in your life. It wasn't like you suddenly decided, well, things are wrong, we got to change it. You just lived in more of the liberal community, or the arts. Obviously, that's quite an open-minded community. Yeah. And you must have been exposed to that a lot if you were pursuing that then.
Yeah.
So, when did you come to Ireland?
Well, I first came to Ireland probably around the mid-90s. Okay. Like I met Grace probably 92, 93. Probably came over around 95, thereabouts, 96. And then we moved over here in 2000. Okay. Yeah,
that sounds about right.
Yeah.
And I mean, was there a point when you decided, I'm going to build a straw bale house, or I'm going to be an organic farmer, or I'm just going to do things differently, or did that emerge? And I mean, yeah.
Well, Grace, like kind of towards the end of the 90s and stuff like that, Grace was going to a organic college down in Limerick called Atona Glass. Yeah. So she was doing that down there. And I suppose, see, it's kind of an odd thing, because you wouldn't really think about, when you think about typically conservative Americans and stuff like that, like when I was 20, my parents, and I'd moved out of the house. Once of my sisters had died, and they had another surviving sister. She's 16 years younger than I am. But they up and pulled up sticks and moved from San Francisco, from the Silicon Valley, way up into the woods.
Your parents?
Yeah.
Fascinating.
No, this is like, they're about 40 or something. Moved way out into the woods. My dad was always like big into the idea of the woods and nature and stuff like that. We used to do a lot of backpacking. They used to get this thing, this kind of big magazine. It was either Mother Jones News or Mother Earth News. I can't really remember, but there'd be a lot of kind of environmental stuff in it. Things about earth ships. Okay. I don't remember them covering straw bale building on it. Okay. But certainly other natural building techniques and stuff like that. So I would have been aware of these things back in like the late 70s. Wow. 80s type of a thing, like, you know. Yeah. And there is kind of an interesting thing with, like, a lot of conservatives, there would be that whole kind of like getting back to nature and self-sufficiency and this is what we're doing thing. There would be, yes, quite a consistent, like a large amount, yeah, of people would be kind of very much kind of like we're abstracting ourselves from the rest of society in a way.
It was
like
a natural evolution, an emergence. I mean, it was what was there.
Kind of,
yeah. Things that you and Grace wanted to do, and if you were going to invest in a house, let's invest in a house that we like and love, and it's our home rather than something which somebody else designed and decided to plonk.
Yeah,
somewhere.
And wasn't detrimental to the environment and was using natural. And
did you actually become interested in the environment at some point, or was that also something which just with you from your parents, from your?
Well, it would have been with me from the parental point of view and stuff like that as well. So it always would have had I would have gone backpacking. We were always camping in the summertime and stuff like that. So, and like where I lived, like there was the orchard, there was a field, there was a creek. So we actually spent quite, even though it was a suburban neighborhood, myself and my friends spent quite a lot of time out in nature. Like, so it was always kind of part there. Yeah. But I suppose what really kind of like did it for the idea of a straw bale house is that Grace's father grows barley.
He has straw.
So there's straw, exactly. You know.
Brilliant.
So it's
the
like
universe presents the solution.
yeah. So it's like we'll build a straw bale house, like you know. Yeah. I mean, things kind of sort themselves in odd kind of ways, like. But so yeah, then we were like, okay, so it was an idea of like, okay, well, we're gonna do a bit of crab farming. We're gonna build a house. Like there was a lot of back and forth about like small house, larger house. Do you build like a small house that kind of suits your needs? And then you'd be talking to people, and I remember going to one place and. The partner was like, oh yeah, it's all great and dandy and stuff like that. Like, but after 10 years, I'm getting tired of living in a construction site. So then we said, okay, well, we'll go for a bigger house, you know, something that's going to be suitable. Like if you want to have children, that type of stuff, like, which, you know, it has its own implications with it as well. Like, so then, okay, well, if we're going to do a bigger thing, then we're going to need to get a mortgage.
Oh gosh.
You know, and all that type of stuff. Like, so that was an adventure in and of itself, because then we finally kind of got a mortgage. And it would have been one of the earlier, like, I don't know if they're doing mortgages on natural buildings and stuff like that now, but it would have been kind of an earlier one. They didn't really know, I think, at the time,
I'm sure
what it all meant. Like, you know,
they were doing when you started.
not really, but there was a few, there was the house.
First in Ireland?
No.
In Carlo.
Yeah, first in Carlo. When we were here, there was maybe about 6 in the country. Okay. And then there has always been a long history of cob building in the country. Mm-hmm. Like that's going, like there's cob buildings that go back like, you know, 200 years, maybe even longer and stuff like that. Like, so that's always kind of been there. But, so they were kind of, yeah, we had to go through that. That took a lot of, well, actually, getting the bank to say, okay, grand, we'll give you a mortgage wasn't too horribly difficult. What came after that was the idea of meeting the criteria. So you had to get building insurance. And then like the concept of like, okay, well, someone that's going to give you insurance afterwards. And then you have to get an engineer on board or an architect or somebody who's like willing to take on this project and eventually sign off on it and stuff like that. Like, the finance, and then we got a lot of Three Little Pig jokes and stuff like that. Like, eventually found an engineer, eventually found an insurance company, and we finally got that squared and stuff like that. Like, and insurance, by the way, is like a horrible kind of like mess, even as it is now on these types of houses, because like our house is considered, from an insurance point of view, is considered a thatch roof house, right? Even though we don't have a thatch roof. No, but because of the material and stuff like that. So it falls underneath that. Like the only thing is, the bizarre thing is in this country, is that, unless things have changed, I haven't researched it in about like 6 years. Like the bizarre thing is, as far as like insurance and straw bale houses, is that there's only one company, like I said, I don't know if things have changed. It's been 6 years now. There's only one company at the time that would insure thatch roof houses, right? Now, on top of that, not only is it there's just one company, but then that one company will fold, and then another company kind of takes its place. They're all dealing with Lloyd's in London, right? But Lloyd's in London is a syndicate of different individuals underwriting, stuff like that, right? So eventually we do have insurance and stuff like that, like, and that's all grand, so we managed to get it sorted, like, but it's quite expensive. Yeah. You know.
So, I mean, what's interesting to hear this story is that it was just like an emergence, and I guess...
Please, thank you.
Tea time. I guess the reason we're sitting here is because, I mean, I haven't been in this game as long as you have, in a sense, and I kind of did make an apparently abrupt change. Okay. It came up in our conversation, and I was talking with an amazing change maker last week as well, who built a cob house up in Meath.
Okay.
And she has pioneered different education system, you know, like a much more natural, human-based education for over 40 years. You know, and meeting some of the pioneers of and it's just amazing. But what's come out is that things seem to be becoming critical, and people who have done unusual things like build a straw bale house because it's, you know, low resource intensity, local materials, human living, no chemicals, whatever the reasons, and growing organic vegetables and trying to teach practices like Grace does of being calm and decent with other people and looking after yourself rather than expecting a pill or an injection to fix you and so on. That seems to be becoming increasingly important. Now, I don't know how you feel about it. You've obviously been an observer. If you've been sort of politically aware since a long time ago, and I'm sort of apolitical, or I'd like to be, but it's becoming increasingly difficult. I mean, you know, we just had another storm, and you look at the inequalities, and you look at the way, you know, rich people are subsidized and poor people are blamed, and I mean, it's very easy to ignore it if you've got a mortgage to pay, but I don't think in the short term it's going to serve anybody now, because things are running out, literally. That's my view. You know, like, material resources are literally running out.
Yes.
And I thought it was ironic, for example, at COP, you know, you have all these fossil fuel companies saying, oh yeah, don't worry, we're going to phase out fossil fuels in, you know, 30, 40 years. Well, their own estimates are that we are going to have completely run out of fossil fuels in 50 years.
Yeah.
So there's no question about having phasing out in 40 years. I mean, you know,
it's kind of a default setting.
Well, the default is probably we're hitting a brick wall in the next few years.
Yeah.
And when you look at people who are systems theorists and system thinkers, like the people who put together that book in '72, Limits to Growth, and they projected what was going to happen. I mean, it's all turning out that way. I mean, I was blown away when I read in 2014 that the limits to growth projections were accurate. The ones made in '72 had actually been tracked by events up to 2014. And the limits to growth said, oh, and in 2015 you'll start to see the cracks. And they also said that in 2020 to 2030 is when resource depletion is going to start hitting. And we always, lithium, I think, for the batteries is pretty much out. There was articles about magnesium, which is essential for the steel in cars, was stocked out in November, and it was only because the Chinese upped production again, because they control selling. You know, it's just very serious issues, which, okay, the person who reads the paper can understand, but right on the ground, you know, where's your food coming from? You buy plastic every day. You look out the window, there's another storm or a heat wave or a flood in the wrong place. The politician is lying again. The corporate guy is lying again. Your boss, you know, whatever it is, it just seems like it's not what we want. So I don't know if you feel that or see it, and if you feel that things are changing for you in your world, or what's the prognosis?
Well, myself in my world in Grace, we kind of just, I suppose we've been doing this for a long time, so we just kind of do it. You know, and it's kind of, that's what we do. And I think you have to have a certain kind of concept of faith about the idea. I'm not saying religious faith, but faith in the idea that what you're doing is the right thing to do, even though there's the possibility that what you're doing isn't really going to make much of a difference because it's so small. Okay. But maybe some other people might get the idea that maybe that might be something to do, or the right thing to do. And then you might end up with a few other people kind of doing things.
That's a very brave and honest man talking there, by the way, lads. A brave and honest man.
Well, you kind of have to do what you have to do, you know, but, and hopefully maybe a few other people kind of might pick up on it and go. And there are people out there that are, and there's like, you know, the person up in Meath, there's people all over the place that are doing things and stuff like that. Like, organic farming is growing, the concepts are growing, you know, there is pushback and all the rest of that type of stuff. Like, but these ideas about, I suppose, like one of the things that has come out of COVID is like people are thinking a lot more about the local area and stuff like that. And and I do think that a lot more people are thinking about the environment. They're thinking about local. They're thinking about kind of like, well, housing. Where does our food come from? The idea of air miles, all the rest of that stuff that maybe a lot of people haven't thought about or never thought about, like, you know. But I do think there is an increasing awareness. Now,
do you think
there is obviously a pushback by other people, segments of the population that just don't want to deal with that, or they might have like some sort of other reason or something like that. Like, I mean, I'm not going to get into it, but I mean, just take the idea of the flat earthers.
The which?
Flat Earth.
Oh.
You know, that whole concept is just like, okay, I mean, I'm not going to get into like a lot, because we could discuss that for ages, but just like,
well, I know that some people would like to, but I'm just going to stop right there because it's, I mean, to go back to Carl Sagan, it's ludicrous. I mean, it was 2,500 years ago that some guy actually worked out the circumference of the planet because of shadows. You know, and because that was a guy who actually, and it wasn't like some political agenda or something. Just, this is the way the universe works, lads.
Yeah, exactly.
And technology.
Yeah. And I think, you know, you have those people and they are pushing back against it. But I do think that there is an increasing portion of the population that is becoming aware of the idea that, yes, we need to be a lot more local. We need to kind of think about what we're doing with resources. Like you take concrete, right? Like we have a concrete foundation. But it's not a slab foundation. It's a strip. Exactly. So there's strips. So we try to minimize the amount of concrete that went into the foundation. But for something like foundations, concrete is like a really useful product. You know, I mean, it's stone. You can pour it in where you want. It has great strength to it. You know, just don't use it willy-nilly. You know, be thoughtful about what you're doing with it.
So don't burn petroleum because it's much more useful as plastic.
Well, it's like you take the idea of like, say, renewable energy and stuff like that, right? It's like, okay, well, we can fire the cars with petroleum. We can like make loads and loads of disposable plastic out of it. We can do all these things like, but at the end of the day, like if you're going to promote like, say, renewable electricity, windmills, stuff like that, like, right? And like convert everything, you know, electrical cars, all the rest of that, which has its own issues as well. Like, but you see the cables. You need the petroleum to produce the rubber to go on the electrical cables. So use it for that instead of just producing a whole bunch of plastic. Yeah, and burning
instead of burning it.
You know, or letting it accumulate in the oceans and choke up fish and sea turtles and all the rest of that type of stuff. Like,
I think we're getting to the crux. I saw something a while back. It was a month, and it was what really sort of made me think, oh, I want to talk to Brandon. And it was something on the internet, the social media thing, and it was some post, and you had made a comment or posted something which saying, basically referencing the idea that people really don't understand what system change involves. Does that resonate with you? Does that sound familiar? Because
that would be kind of what I was addressing, yes.
Because I know that people talk about, oh, we can do this and we can do that, but it seems like even when people promote, you know, oh, this is a great positive thing, I'm doing an eco-business, they don't appreciate the consequence of the idea and how it's not really going to work because of the number of people or because of the resources required or because of the structure, whatever it is. So maybe you can talk to the sort of the framework of where we might go and what does system change really mean in terms of the changes in our lifestyles or the changes in our thinking, maybe. Because I rather like to think of the idea that the lifestyle might improve, although it's changing a lot, if we have a different approach, if we think about our lives differently, if we don't think that, you know, working for a big company in an office in a big city makes us happy, if we realize that something else is actually quite enjoyable. So that's where I'd like to help people believe that their lives aren't as wonderful as they imagine, and that within them is something more fulfilling. But to change we are not going to be able to have what we have today. Our consumption rate is just not.
No, definitely not.
Just interject a couple things. A couple chat there.
Yeah, please.
Somebody says it's a little bit difficult to hear you.
Me.
Although Brandon is very clear. And then Carmel said people don't know the difference between system change and tinkering. Which
Thank
I find
you.
interesting.
Thanks, Carmel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to let Brandon talk because he's got the mic.
So
If I
what's
put the mic
tinkering
the other
and
way,
system change?
then they might hear me, not that they want to, because I've got an annoying voice there. Now you got it right.
Yeah, well, at the end of the day, you're an integral part of this conversation as well. So, yeah, I suppose system change and tinkering. I suppose in a lot of ways, like you were kind of saying in your earlier monologue, the idea of the systems we're dealing with, you're talking about like systems and patterns with human psychology and human thought and the way we do things that go back to the dawn of civilization. And you're not really going to change them in a really fast manner. You know, you can be hopeful and hope. Yeah. Well, I think we can be hopeful and we can hope.
I agree in a way.
Yeah.
I usually throw out an example, this example, to say, yeah, we can change very quickly. And I think these days people probably talk about the Second World War and they say, oh yeah, we changed the whole of the US manufacturing over to making bombs in 1 year. You know,
And then ended up with chemical fertilizers.
we can go down that part, but what I mean is people can change. And my sort of frame of reference was when my children started showing up with Facebook in 2004 or whatever it is, and I was like, oh, that is just a disgusting thing. You're always there. But within a year or two, that was it. If you didn't have Facebook, you weren't a human being. You were just like.
Yeah.
A prehistoric peasant. So maybe the change can happen quickly because when people decide to move. But I agree with you very much that we have very entrenched behaviors. Now, in my spiel earlier, that entrenched behavior has been reinforcing itself for 2,500 years.
Oh, longer than that.
Well, prior to that, I think it was a much more fluid dynamic, open to possibilities. And we came from a place prior to that when there were fewer people of actually quite stable and happy existence. And there were pockets around the planet of, where people got on and there wasn't this need to fight all the time and compete and grab. I mean, you can look at North America, for example. Right? That was a very stable environment with humans in it for, 2 millennia?
Yeah.
Until the Europeans showed up. But prior to that, everything was, they lived with one another, they had their codes, people could do what, there was a lot of humanity and nature and symbiosis.
There was a lot of space between people.
There was a lot of space between people. Yeah. And today we're not going to have that space because we're just too many people and we certainly need to reduce the population.
Yes.
But we have technology which can give us the facility to have engaging lives at a much more complex level.
Yeah.
But we don't need to be in this kind of control matrix, which is what I feel that we've bargained for. And the bargain has become a deeper and deeper debt because we don't. I mean, you sort of emerged at the age of 4 looking over the back seat and seeing Easy Rider. For me, it was just sort of like a moral compass probably given to me by my parents, be good, be nice. I think personally I picked it up a little bit when I realized I didn't like hurting people because I had the capacity to do so.
Yeah.
And you'd get in fights with people, and when I was about 10, I just pounding on somebody, and I realized, wait a minute, this is not good. I don't like it, and I just walked away. And after that, I just didn't want to be in a physical confrontation.
Yes. And it doesn't...
But I did actually change. Here it goes. I'm going to say the terrible word, from a banker.
Yeah.
Right? I was a financial engineer, an investor, a banker, whatever you want to call it. And suddenly I woke up and I say, well, either we're going to make this industry good, like morally good, because it's clearly not. There must be another way to do things. And I can't go back to that world anymore because it is toxic.
Oh, yeah, that was kind of, I suppose in a similar reason, that was one of the reasons why I left nursing.
Really?
Yeah, because like the idea of medicine in the States is very much a money-making concept.
Of course.
You know?
Yeah.
And even, like, I was working for the Veterans Administration, which is not, quote-unquote, a money-making organization. It's funded by the government. But at the same time, instead of actually making money, they're always trying to save money, which is the same kind of a thing, like, you know.
It's a singular benchmark.
Kind of, in a way,
Instead of considering that, you know, the well-being of the veteran might be something that we should evaluate.
Yeah, and holistically, how do we deal with this and actually holistically get the person better instead of going, okay, well, we have them better now, so we're just going to like, but, you know, in 3 months they come on back because they're still dealing with the same problems they had before.
Okay.
You know, like the death from alcoholism has a rhythm to it.
Sounds like
I won't get into the depths of it, but it does. Like there's a whole rhythm. It's like, oh, okay, cold room. Wow. And you know, there's a whole rhythm to it, like, you know. And yeah, it is a scary type of a thing. Like, and so I had issues with that. Like you were like the whole idea with baking. It's like, oh well, yeah. And I was like, okay, I've had enough of this kind of, because I think medicine, pharmaceuticals, all that type of stuff, like really, if you're going to be involved in a in pharmacy and producing drugs that are supposed to be helpful for people and stuff like that, like I think there has to be a certain altruism to it. You know, it's not all about money and profit and stuff like that. You're trying to help people.
Statement in this world when Moderna, who said they were going to give it away, is now raking in the cash.
Yeah. Or like, you know, the concept of like, you know, medication for cystic fibrosis. And it's like thousands upon thousands upon thousands a year for the new medicine to help people with cystic fibrosis and stuff like that. And it's like, oh, but these are like regular people. These aren't people that are like, you know, it's not Jeff Bezos' children.
No.
You know. It just isn't. You know, it's like people don't have that kind of money. And then you have medical insurance and like, it's just like, I don't know. Like, anyways, that was I had a moral issue with it.
Okay.
There was a few other things as well. It just was kind of like, okay, I've had enough of this. Like, and maybe if I'd gone into a different aspect to nursing, maybe I might have stayed with it. But it was like, it was kind of like the area of nursing I worked in, I suppose in a way, you just get kind of tired of taking somebody off to the cold room every like 2 to 4 weeks, like, you know.
Depressing.
Yeah, you get used to it after a while.
That's
but
even worse, isn't it?
yeah, kind of, yes.
I mean, but that's the world we create. So,
Yeah.
I mean, getting back to the big picture, sort of, I mean, what are we facing into? Because, you know, obviously we don't predict the future, and we have choices. But if we are going to change in a very short amount of time,
Yes.
in a very short amount of time, what are we looking into? I mean, what do you think? I mean, you've had the experience of doing, you know, a gentle, lifelong experience of being a bit softer on the world. What are other people going to have to face up to when they...
I don't know necessarily. I mean, I do think that there is an increasing awareness of things, and certainly an increasing awareness of that idea of like, okay, I'm tired of working for the man or the corporation or whatever. Like, I mean, there seems to be like a huge amount of people that are just like, I've had enough of this job, especially kind of like retail jobs, fast food jobs and stuff like that. Like, and they're just like going, okay, we've had enough of this. We're out of here. Like, this isn't really doing it for us anymore. Like, so, I mean, that's like, people are becoming aware of this idea of like, oh, well, you know, there's got to be more to life and stuff like that. Like, now, how that's actually enacted in a speedy type of a manner, I honestly don't know. Because, like, to me, the idea of, like, say, being self-sufficient and self-sufficiency and stuff like that. And I don't do as much of it now as I would have previously. But it's kind of the idea of being engaged in your own survival on a daily basis. So I remember when I was over in India, I'm sure you probably know of Vandana Shiva. Yeah, so myself and Grace are doing some work with her over in India on one of her organic farms.
Really?
Yeah, we were there for 6 months. It was a fab experience and stuff like that.
Very
But they also, at the farm, they do courses and stuff like that. And one of the courses was a Gandhiism and the concept of Gandhi and stuff like that. And then one of the things that I remember was this idea that Gandhi thought that everybody should spend an hour a day in the garden, tending the vegetables, and doing things. Yeah. And that you're responsible for kind of like, you're engaging every day with an aspect of your own survival. Instead of going, okay, well, I'm going to the office or I'm going to the job, I'm making money, and then I'm going to, somebody else is doing it. I'm actually involved. Now, you're probably, you know, people might still be going to the store and buying things, but every day you're involved in some sort of aspect of it. And that is really kind of what it is. The thing is, though, if you can do it on a community basis, then, and you have enough people with it, then I think you can actually really be successful. If you're just doing it by yourself, it's just a lot of work. Like I figured, actually, and see, this is the whole thing. Like, for the most part, I buy wood now, right?
You don't have it. Oh, well, then maybe on the farm you have.
No, I have it. I have wood that needs to be cut down, but it's actually more economically feasible for me, from an economic point of view, to have a job and buy in wood.
Yep.
Because when I was doing it, it was roughly about 7 hours a week.
Yeah.
Which actually ends up being a lot of time.
Yeah.
But if you can dispense that among a community of people that live together, you know, and whereas, like, say, 1 week you're working with the gardens for half a day, and the next week not everybody, maybe you could have like different people kind of going around doing things and stuff like that at different times, but you're kind of sharing the workload and everybody's sharing together. And I think that's kind of like, in a lot of ways, the main concept is like, in order to get us to a position where we're dealing with all the things that we're dealing with, we need to think more about the idea that we need to share. Instead of just like myself.
He said it.
Well, it's the idea, like there's a lot of, like, kind of what you're conditioned to in a lot of ways, especially in America.
Yep.
I mean, here there's a lot more of a sharing concept and stuff like that in this country than there is in the States. But certainly in the States, even with, now also this is like going back 20 years and stuff like that, but even there's a real kind of concept of like, oh, this is my patch.
Yep. Independence.
And you're not getting any of my patch.
Yep.
Not interdependence, yeah.
Yeah, non-interdependence, exactly. This is like an independence. This is my patch. I've worked my patch. You're not getting any of my patch. And that's not my problem. Like, even...
Background to that, just out of interest, I think background to that is a little bit the banking industry, because they realised that if they got families to break up and for all the children to have their own houses, they'd have a lot of extra mortgages. So they kind of encouraged this nuclear family concept, which is only, you know, maybe 50, 60, 70 years old. And prior to that, people did live together as families.
Yeah.
And in other parts of the world than America and, you know, Ireland's not bad, but we've had a housing boom too, and people have spread out all over the place.
And it kind of changed.
Yeah, and it's kind of sad because you don't see a family, and then you have the pandemic hit, and what you were saying earlier was very interesting, how people are reflecting on the community, and then you get there and say, oh, and for the community to work, people have to act in the community with the food and the wood and the whatever, and building house, you know, the Amish erecting the house together and so on.
That's an it's the Amish, yeah. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, but that concept is certainly a viable way forward, and it does mean that we have to take this very brutal mentality of independence out of the culture in a way, but voluntarily, and say, no, I don't mind if my children live with me, or I don't mind living with my parents. We don't all need a new house, and we don't all need to be the king. We don't all need to be the king. We can all be peasants, in fact, and the peasant life isn't so bad actually.
Yeah, and it's I suppose in a lot of ways, how do you, and especially from an American point of view, it's the idea of how do you reconcile the concept of the individual with the concept of the community, so that you're supporting both. Whereas like the United States is very much like the individual. There's a lot more sense of community, I find, in Ireland.
Oh, it's
and
wonderful.
it's one of the things I liked about Ireland.
Oh.
Like there is, like in family community.
We wouldn't survive without community.
Yeah.
We would not survive. That would have been gone a long time ago, probably into the hole, but certainly not doing what I'm doing. Right? There is no way I can survive without people around here helping.
Yeah.
Right? And I don't mean in the garden, because it's hard enough to get the kids to lift the shovel, but that's okay. That's their choice. But you know, when I have a friend in town who can fix the widget on the back of the tractor so that it keeps going for another few years, you know, or you know, the grocer, the only grocer in Carlow. There's one grocer left in Carlow, and he's happy enough to take some of my carrots and sell them. Well, okay, so I don't make any money, but at least it covers some of the time I put in.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And maybe some people taste that carrot and they realize that actually there's a difference.
And it's a lovely carrot.
Yeah. And maybe we shouldn't be just giving the supermarket money for petrol, because that's what we're buying when we buy food nowadays. We're buying petrol, we're buying diesel, we're buying fossil. We're not buying food anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm very lucky. You know, friends, first year I started gardening, a guy who I hardly knew, Dave, Dangerous Dave. I'd met him looking for ducks in Tullow, and I said, Dave, can you come and give me a... Comes out in the rain to roll rocks and stones out of the plots like a tiller. You know, I mean, that is... And that's for nothing.
Yeah.
That's just to give a bit of a hand.
Yeah.
And so I think we're really lucky to be here.
Oh, I would agree. Like the strength of the concept of family as well.
Yes.
You know, because it's just like say back in the States, it's kind of almost this idea of like you're 18 and it's like the parents are like, oh, you're out. And the kids are like, oh yeah, I'm out and I'm moving to the next coast over there.
Okay.
You know, like everybody's like, oh, I'm getting as far. Now, that's not always the case. But it would be like, oh yeah, or the parents have to move or something like that. Like
that's highly visible.
well, it's
in
very
the culture.
individualistic because it's like, okay, whereas you move here and it's like, so all of Grace's family, bar one, all live within walking distance.
That's wonderful.
You know,
That's wonderful.
and like it's a great thing when you have children.
Yeah.
You know, because like I have friends back in San Francisco, you know, and they don't have any family around to help support them with their children and stuff like that.
You can't
now they
do
have
that.
friends and stuff like that, like, but
It's not the same as having the grandparents who look after the kids of an afternoon.
or the aunt.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, oh, listen, we got a bit of trouble here. I got to take this guy off to the hospital or something like that. Or maybe they might call you up and say, listen, I'm in a bit of bother. And it's like, oh, grand. Okay, bring the kids over or I'll come over to you or whatever. There's that support, like, and that in itself is community, but that also needs to expand out to like, you know, the rest of everybody else, like, as well. Like, it's the idea of like, okay, well, I'm going to share a bit of my time. You share a bit of your time. So like, I'll scratch your back, you scratch my back, that type of stuff.
But
like,
it's not
you know.
even a bargain, is it?
No,
it's just we're all in this together.
Yeah.
Because people put up with, I'm going to say a rude word, but people put up with shits as well. You know, there are a few lads in the community who are just, well, they're tolerated. And every now and then they, you know, if they go past a certain point, somebody in the community is going to tell them.
Yeah.
Pretty sharpish, give a slap upside the head, and then they sort of like pull back a bit, you know, not be such a
and in some ways, sometimes they can also provide their own odd sense of like humor. No.
There's a story there.
So, anyway. But I do. I think sharing is kind of like one of the main things that really.
Do you think we're going to get out of this?
This particular conversation?
No.
Oh, this
situation. Do you think we're going? I mean, you know, you're not a young man, but you probably didn't think civilization would implode before you know, you
I
popped
can't.
your clogs.
Okay, yeah,
And I,
I have always been I've had conversations like this going all the way back to the 90s with friends, and the concept is what we devised was we're hopeful realists. Mm-hmm. We're hopeful in the idea that things will improve and everything will eventually be grand. Mm-hmm. Realistically, are we actually going to be capable of doing it in this huge amount of time? And it's an interesting thing because the concept of where we are now as a world, as a species, is where we are now would have actually originally been introduced to me through the concept of biblical prophecy. And that would have been done back in the late 70s. Mm-hmm. That basically where we are now would have...
So how do you characterize that? Because a biblical prophecy sounds like a dangerous thing to wield these days, but
it is, yes.
Is the prophecy, because you were bad, you will be punished and go to hell, Armageddon or something, or?
No, basically, see, this is the other flip of the coin too, right? Is that from a purely atheistic point of view and a scientific point of view, like you were talking about that book. I'd never read the book, but you were talking about that book where it was written back in 1972. You mentioned it there just a little like that. Yes. Mm. Where we are now has been talked about since like the late 60s.
Yep. Well,
you know,
a long time.
Even before that.
Yeah.
You know, like Aldous Huxley was talking about it. Yeah. You know, like it goes back, you know, envisioning things and stuff like that, like, which I think A Brave New World is a much more accurate comparison.
This.
Yeah. Carl Sagan was on.
The whole series, and it was just like right there. And I come across Mork and Mindy, which I never watched until now, which was
Fab
at that
show.
time.
Yeah.
And it is kind of, it pops my brain to see that they were talking about things like misogyny and energy consumption and pollution and the climate change. In the 80s they were talking about it. And banking, and so on, and it was right there, and it was almost like it was sort of pushed under the carpet during the early 80s by the Reagan...
neoliberalism and stuff like that, like, you know, it was like, well, we don't want to talk about this stuff because it's talking about the idea of watching growth and all the rest of it. We want free growth and everybody needs to make money and this is what it's about, like. So, like, see, I find it from an interesting point of view that, like from the biblical point of view, and it's not like but basically I was told when I was young, is like essentially what's going to happen is this is purely from a biblical point of view, but it's the same stuff, that basically there's going to be like repetitive diseases and viruses and plagues and stuff like that, like rolling through, like, okay, no, that's biblical, right? But like it's been a very long time ago that scientists have been saying, well, if we keep encroaching into the wild,
absolutely,
stuff like that, like there's viruses and stuff like that out there that we're going to be picking up that are going to start getting into the environment that we've never had before. I mean, a good simple one that don't even need science for was the European invasion of America.
Yeah.
And how many of the Native Americans were wiped out without ever putting a weapon to them at all whatsoever, just because of smallpox or the common cold or whatever, you know. So there's just that idea, but the whole concept, like back when I was young, before I even came with there's like rolling viruses, economic collapse, wide civil unrest and stuff like that, like kind of persecution of people for various different religious beliefs or whatever. It's an interesting kind of a thing, right? So where we are now is something that I've been aware of for quite a long period of time. For me, it's not a new phenomenon. No. So the idea of like, are we going to like suddenly be able to make a switch in like 10, 20 years time?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'd like to be hopeful. Really, I would. I think there is scope for that if people become aware and actually start to do something about it. And you're able to overcome the people that are pushing back against it. And I think really at the end of the day, like it's like I was saying earlier, the whole concept of self-sufficiency, building straw bale houses, organic farming, all that whole thing and concept of the bigger picture, it's almost in a way, you have to have faith in the idea that what you're doing is going to make a better place for future generations.
Well, you have to care about future generations too, because if you're an individualist, you don't care. When I started this game and I said, okay, I'm going to jump out of the penthouse suite and I'm going to see if we can do things differently, I imagined in my naivety at the time that I'd give it a crack, and if I found out that we can't actually balance ethics, economics and the environment, if we can't do that, then I can fuck over everybody else just as well as the next guy, so I might as well get my 7 Ferraris, 4 houses and all the rest of it. Now, unfortunately, I wasn't that kind of person. And I also found out that it was possible, and it is possible, and it's a much better place to be. But whether we will get there or not, your realism, a hopeful realist. I had hope. I didn't want to. I found out that I was becoming a prisoner of hope. I'm much more a realist these days. But it doesn't mean I'm not going to keep on doing the things the way I think they ought to be done, because if I frankly, I can't do things the other way. I do not feel good. I do not feel happy. I would frankly rather not be here than play the game as it's supposed to be played. And it's rather sad, because I probably got very good resources with which to play the game if I wanted to use it in that way. So I am a realist. You've mentioned biblical, which makes me tingle in an uncomfortable way. You've mentioned belief and faith and these sorts of things, and I find that very interesting because it's very fundamental to our behavior, what we believe. And what we believe can differ among different people, and it is often a reason for conflict and fighting. However, that holonic framework that I was describing, that's about values. And when it comes to values, we're all humans, and we actually have the same kind of dynamic internal mechanisms that work. And so, yes, when we're scared, we are frightened and we fight. But when we realize that things are good, we want to share. And we want to help others. I mean, we actually do have a biological tendency to altruism. And I believe, based on the games I've been playing for the last couple of decades, that is a part of the dynamic of the emergence of consciousness in life. And I'm able to remove myself from the human perspective and just say, I'm not an anything, I'm just observing existence. And this is how existence has manifested from nothingness to this highly complex universe. And there happens to be this planet Earth where there are these things going on. But they're just behaving because of the accident of existence, right? The energy matter in space-time, and this is how it happens. People sometimes say, well, what about free will? If it's all, logical, preordained by science, do we have free will? Maybe we're just being manipulated by something on the outside. The response to that is to say that what we understand is that there is a randomness built into existence. There's a pattern, and the pattern follows, but there's a randomness in there, so that it's not directly predictable, but you can certainly see patterns. And what I would say is that we have a pattern which can lead us to higher consciousness, and we have the capacities in our developed form of organization. But we have no rights to it. We are not specially ordained that it is going to happen to us. We can quite easily be wiped out because there's life somewhere else in the universe. And this lad proved it. And why would we be so special? There's nothing to suggest that the biblical story has some, bearded fellow saying, you are good and you are bad, or anything like that. Exactly. But faith, that belief system, is so important. And if people do start to question their beliefs, then maybe they will have space for other rationalizations for existence, other reasons. Pew Research Center puts out a lot of good data, and a few years ago, I think it was 2018, they did a survey on religion. And I found it very surprising to find out that about 85%, just under 85% of people on this planet subscribe to religion. And I thought, well, that can't be the case because we have such a sort of a secular society now. But it's true.
Yeah.
It's true. And what was interesting was that it's almost more entrenched in America than it is in Asia. There's more flexibility out in those communities. And although they have belief systems and they worship and they look after their ancestors and there is a kind of a spiritual dimension to their lives, they are also secular in their approach to life, more so than in some Western cultures.
Yeah.
But I think if we can maybe nurture a more human culture and stop pretending that we're under threat and realize that we have an opportunity to thrive instead of just survive, then the change could be quick. When I started the game in 2000, 99, but well, let's call it 2000, I said, we have 20 years to fix everything, and that's plenty of time, and then the world will be perfect. And, I listed all of these organizations which were saying, we're going to change. Shell was putting out these ads for alternative energy, BP was doing the same, and blah, 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 and you had the SRI funds, and of course then you had the noughties. And here we are in a much worse situation than we were 20 years ago. Much further to go, much less time. So the realism is kind of poking me. But I've been really happy to be given an element of hope and to know that you've been doing this for a lot longer and you're still calm and happy with good friends and looking forward.
I think, you have to have hope.
Hopeful friends, one or the other.
Well, friends certainly help, a lot as well. But I do think you have to have hope.
Yeah.
So.
Are there any questions? Sorry, Pam.
Do you want to open it up?
Oh, does anybody want to join in? Click off the mics and say hello. Otherwise, I've got Pamela. Carmel is still around. Ivan, it's lovely to see you. Thank you very much for joining us. Elva, I hope you're having fun in Texas. Well, Brandon, what do you say? Should we end on hope?
Well, yeah, sure. I think, hope is very important. You have to be hopeful that we're going to get it together at some point. Otherwise, why? You just go out and buy a whole bunch of Ferraris and... it's like you just...
But I'm afraid
I think you do have to have hope.
I think it won't be that. It'll just be people ransacking one another's houses for a crust of bread.
Yeah, and that's the whole...
A pretty precarious situation at the moment.
Yes, and it can be in a very precarious situation very fast, but I hope that, there's things that we've done that even if society collapses, that I hope we can kind of hold on to. Advances in medicine, the fact that 50% of women don't just die because they're pregnant. Which is kind of actually a recent thing in Western society that doesn't happen. Things like that. Hopefully we can hold on to the idea of we're going to go ransack the neighbors over there.
Did you ever read Turtle Bunbury's book, 1847?
No.
There was a very fascinating story in that, and it was related to what you were talking about, with infant mortality and maternal death in birth. This was 1847, okay, that's when it's set. And there was some lad in Austria or somewhere, and he was helping deliver the babies, and he started to notice that when he washed his hands before delivering the baby, that nobody died.
Yes.
And he took him most of the rest of his life to get the medical community to start washing their hands when they were doing surgery. And at the time, the whole idea was that the surgeon didn't have to wash his hands because he was a gentleman, so clearly he wasn't dirty.
The Civil War did the same thing in the States.
Okay.
They started to recognize this idea that if I wash my hands, these guys actually survive a bit
Chop
better.
the egg.
Yeah, than if I'm just like and sterilize the tools and stuff like that. Like,
Yeah, it will be a shame when we lose all of that because it's all
Yeah.
been digitized and gone.
well, that's the whole thing. Like, yeah, like what do you do with all that stuff? Goes
Carmel's
built.
got her hand up, I'm not sure.
Oh, hi, Carmel.
I'm not sure if she wanted to unmute and ask a question or if it's just...
Can you unmute? Oh, is that Ivan?
Yes, yeah.
Hi Tom, hi Brandon. I just want to say thank you very much for the conversation, and it's very heartening to meet another person who's got such energy and hope, and just to know that there are people out there that are thinking about these things, and not only that, doing something about it. And yeah, when I was talking up to Tom, I was saying I think there are little mushroom groups everywhere of people who are trying different things and doing different things, and it's lovely to meet another one, so thank you.
Thank you, Carmel. And
Thank you.
Right. So, am I on at the moment?
Yeah.
Yes, Ivan.
Okay. So,
And I remember my parents had a lovely library, and I always remember going to some books by Albert Schweitzer and looking at his life, both as a physician and as a preacher, and his decisions that he made in order to go to Africa to treat.
A jak to mam na latarcie? On nie widział?
Okay.
A jak to mam...
And
Oni to notacie, a pakiet to widzi.
okay, sorry, am I off now? I don't know what's happened.
It's all right.
Okay.
Somebody
Okay.
had their mic off. Please go ahead.
Okay.
Ivan. Sorry.
Okay, so, and I remember seeing that book. I must have been 7 or 8, and asking myself, what is this all about? I was struck by the pictures as well, and much later on in life, when I read about Schweitzer and his life, I was struck by an inspiration that came to him on the boat going to his facility in Africa, and it was sort of an inspired thought that came out of nowhere on the boat, which was this phrase of reverence for life. Reverence for life. And it seems to me that much of it comes from this understanding of what it is to revere life, which you don't always appreciate you may appreciate when you're young, but it has a different emphasis as you get older. And one of the things that has struck me is that when you start to revere life, you are then actually in the presence of something that's much bigger than yourself, which is in fact a kind of mystery, a mystery that you're invited to participate in. And the more you participate in it, the more mysterious it becomes, because what happens then is that you begin to see the relationship between all things. And if you sense what the relationship is between all things, then you've got a lot to learn. One of the things that I think has happened is that we have forgotten what that relationship is all about. We only see one particular side of it. So where you get that information, maybe in youth. In my own case, my uncle had a farm. He raised Jersey cattle, and he planted all kinds of vegetables and strawberries. He sold strawberries to the Queen. That was the biggest thing that he was very proud of. But he had a huge farm, and we used to work on the farm. In the holidays, we would go out and we would work on the farm. And I never realized, I just took it for granted, okay? It wasn't until very much later that I began to appreciate what that actually meant in terms of what we are dealing with now and what you have been talking about. So I'm always looking for things that resonate with that. So I just came across recently a book, which I think is absolutely wonderful, by Merlin Sheldrake, who is the son of Rupert Sheldrake, and he has just written a book. It's called Entangled Life. It's a wonderful, wonderful phrase. I mean, it's 2 words that are fantastic. And it's called How Fungi Make Our Worlds, Change Our Minds, and Shape Our Futures. Now, when you read this book, what you realize is this isn't just about a biological entity that is sitting underneath all of life. It's all about what happens to you as an individual, as a person, when you begin to see the way in which fungi are, in fact, entangled in everything that we do, and that we are then changed by looking at what the mystery is that represents fungi, which is just one part of the world. Now, how to get that sense of reverence and mystery into the life of people, whether they're young or old, is to me what it seems to be all about right now. And one of the things is that I think a lot of it comes in a quite surprising way, in a way that isn't sitting in our educational system at the moment, where you go from, the logic of the system is to go from one level to the next, in principle, so that you can establish yourself and get a degree and all the rest of the things. But it's a very formalized, quite blinkered in many respects system. Even though university education was never started out like that. The idea of a university was the universe, to see the universe, to be in touch with all kinds of people from different parts of life and interested in different things where you would all mix together. We've gone a long way from that right now to get a degree in a particular area. And I think it's caused a huge number of problems. One of the things in my own life, which, I became, as a result of doing film work, I became interested in balloons, and I learned how to fly balloons and to repair them and to make them and to instruct them and to do all things. And I traveled many parts of the world, and especially in the States. And one of the things that you learn is sometimes when you're flying a balloon, you have to find a place to land, and you're landing very often in an area that you know nothing about, very often on a farm. And most people love to have a balloon come and land in, as long as you don't disturb their cattle and ruin their crops. And almost unanimously, what happens is that you are invited in to come and share a meal or have a coffee or stay overnight, okay? And when you sit down and have a conversation with people you know nothing about, what comes out of that are the life that they are living, because in many cases you will never see these people again. So what they do is they share their life with you and the things that are important to them, their animals and their crops and their rivers and the things that have meaning for them, okay? And one of the things that I observed over 20 years of flying is that many of the things that people care about, everybody cares about. You want to have good food. You want to raise your family. You want to have relationships with your children. You want to have good friendships. You're concerned about pollution, okay? And the things that are going on and how the health of your community. They're all shared. But what happens is that people don't quite know, when they feel those things, how they're going to embrace them. It's very, very difficult in our modern society to embrace all those things, especially if you're trying to create a living for your family and you have to deal with your family and you are not necessarily in a community that supports you because of the ideas that we have about independence in our society. So for me to bring this back in tangible form to people wherever they are in their life, whether they're young or middle-aged or old, is really what the work, I call it work but not in the sense that most people understand work. It's the task that we all have. And when you get to my age, now at 76, okay, the thing that you realize is you don't have a lot of time to do this anymore, because most of your life has already been lived and you don't know how long you're going to live anyway, okay? So it becomes more and more important to impart this knowledge and this wisdom where you can as a model for other people, which I think is what both of you are doing, okay? You're creating models that people can look at and say, I could do this too. I could explore this avenue, and how to create the models so that actually it isn't just some sort of simple rite of passage, but it is actually a deep exploration into your own soul, and the soul of other people is where I think it resides. Now, in religion, we've managed to do some of that, but unfortunately, religious ideology very often has crucified thousands of people who did not share your particular belief. So you've got to be careful when you go into religion. And what I see now, if you go to many churches, you will see the most beautiful architecture of people who have had that transcendent vision of what the soul is all about. But guess what? The buildings are crumbling. They're crumbling because they don't have people going inside anymore. They don't have people on their knees praying, understanding that there are higher powers that they don't know of anymore, with which they could be in touch. So, one of the things I try to do within churches is to restore the churches, to restore the beauty of a church, because some of of course it's terribly difficult. Why? Because if you don't have the resources to look after what you've built, you find yourself in a huge amount of trouble, and it takes a huge amount of time and energy to do it. So you only have one life to live that we know of on earth. So the question is, and this is my question to you, where do you place your attention in all of the things that need to be done now, from stopping poaching to growing trees, to avoiding waste and pollution, to embracing all the new technologies of solar power, for example? Where do you concentrate your life first and foremost, wherever you are? I think I know what you're trying to do, but I'd be interested in just hearing a response to that, if that makes sense.
You mean that wasn't a rhetorical question?
You might need a mic, Tom.
It's right there.
Okay.
But Brandon, go first.
Well, I
got 2 copies.
In regards to like where do you put your resources and stuff like that, like I think really all you can do is just do. Get out. Like you can spend all your time lobbying the government and stuff like that, and that's an important thing, and it's probably a good thing that some people do that. But for me, and I suppose in a way that's getting back to the individual type thing, but it's also for me and for my headspace and where I am and stuff like that. It's like engaging with government, engaging with stuff like that, reading a lot of different things. It just kind of makes me angry. And I've gotten to this point in my life where I'm just tired in a way. Like, it was great when I was a punk. Well, I still am, really, in a lot of ways. But you just get tired of being angry about this stuff all the time. And it's like, gather up some tree seeds, plant the trees, sow them, water them, let them grow, plant them on, grow some vegetables, talk to the children, talk to other people here. And that's really what you can do, and 1 or 2 people might be like, hey, okay, that sounds good. I like the way that's resonating with me. And I suppose, like the earlier thing, that's what it was. The Easy Rider thing as a child resonated within me somewhere or another. Strangely enough, or however, but I think it was more, somehow or another, it resonated with my essential DNA of who I am. Not necessarily the DNA from my parents, but just, I think it resonated with me psychically of like, okay, this is the, and I just think like now I'm just like I spent, a couple of weeks there, I was driving my kids to the art class and stuff like that, and there's like, okay, well, there's a bunch of ash keys. I'm gonna grab these ash keys. And then I'm out walking, and it's like, oh, there's a bunch of ash keys. I grab these ash keys. And I'll go over here and I'll grab those ash keys. And I'm just kind of thinking, okay, you know, there's the ash dieback thing, but I'm going to grab these keys, which are from trees that have been growing here for quite a long time, as opposed to some that have been, because I did plant a whole bunch for coppice, but they all would have been those ones that were imported from England. That is kind of seems to be the issue with the ash dieback. But I'm like, okay, well, there's the other trees here. I'm just going to take the seeds off of these trees that have been here for a while. I'm going to plant those, and then hopefully they'll get on. And I think that's really kind of, you just do. That's where you put your resources. You just do what you can and just do it. And I think don't get hung up on that whole idea of like, am I doing enough or am I, you know, not doing enough or whatever. It's like, you just do and be happy with what you can do.
I like a lot of that idea because I guess I started home. I would be focusing maybe a bit, as Brandon said, on what goes on here, on my family, my kids a bit, although they're pretty much up under their own sort of steam now. They have a sort of a standing invitation to be part of the team here, as it were, and they, whenever they're here, they will help less or more in the garden or whatever it is, or fixing the roof and so on. I think my passion rises and wanes. Obviously, when I started this game 20 years ago, I was full of beans and I was running around doing about 8 jobs at the same time. Imagining that, you know, I could do that because I'd been trained, and so therefore it was possible and I had the resources so I could do it. But it got quite tiring, and in 2008 I nearly gave up completely. You know, I pulled right back, and I said, okay, I'm going to do the kitchen and the driving of the kids and, you know, work the garden and so on, but I'm not going to be trucking off to the city every now and then trying to advise, you know, help investors stop investing in the wrong things or whatever it was, or help companies be moral and ethical, if, you know, because it was just always up against the brick wall. And then somebody said, oh, you should write your story. And so the book happened after a few years. And I mean, Ivan, you were instrumental. I mean, when you came back like a few days after getting the notice in the email and said, oh, this is fantastic, send me 5 copies. You know, it was like, oh my God, there are people out there who actually are moving in the same direction. There is hope, you know, there is something to be done. And yeah, fine, so that was great, and it's never been very vibrant or anything, and I vacillate between just saying, oh look, it's very unimportant what I do, as long as I'm here, as long as someone's digging the garden, as long as someone's chopping the wood, you know, we'll survive. We don't need a lot, we're lucky we live in a 200-year-old house. Eventually I'll get around to fixing the roof, maybe, and if not, then one of the kids can do it. But I don't need to tell people my story. And then other times I think, oh, well, you know, like there are people who want to hear the story, and I see things in a different way, and I want to share it so that other people cannot make the mistakes that they're running into. So, like at the beginning of last year with the COVID hitting, and I was sort of like, oh, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this. It was like in February I was telling my parents, if you don't come now, you won't be able to travel because they will lock everybody down. And 2 weeks later, the lockdown happened, and that was it. I didn't see my parents for a year, right? And when you say, oh, well, obviously the economies are going to crash because everything's in lockdown, so obviously there's going to be a recession. Well, it took another 4 months for that to be in the Financial Times or something. But so at that time, I was like, yeah, spread the knowledge, you know, share some ideas, and just, okay, so 3 people look at it, and fine. But if I can do that, so I will.
But you see, in a sense, you're potent. What I'm talking about are all those people who are impotent. In other words, they're living within an institutional system which makes it very, very difficult for them to exercise the kind of the choice that you have made. I mean, for most people, 8 billion people, for most people, it's a question of pure survival. I mean, they are living in terrible circumstances, unable to feed themselves, clothe themselves, have all kinds of diseases, have very little medical assistance. And that represents the majority of the people in the world. So, and this is what institutions very often thrive upon: the misery of people who have no power to actually execute the things that you're talking about. So the question is, what do you do in an expanded way to deal with those kind of situations? Or is there anything you can do that would make sense?
That's a fair point, Ivan. And I appreciate my privilege. Once I probably thought that I could. I had aspirations for, having corralling other people's money, which used to be my profession, and investing it in globally responsible initiatives. That was the name of the organization, right? Globally Responsible Initiative. What?
Have you given up on doing that?
Pretty much.
Yeah, okay.
Pretty much. I mean, it's not like I can't do it. It's not like it's not there. I think when I started, I was of the view that capitalism wasn't the problem. It was just a system of people's choices.
Yeah.
However, in the last couple of years, I have realized that that's not accurate. Money itself is not a problem. It's just it's a tool, and that perspective is accurate. So money is not the problem, but capitalism is the problem, because capitalism is actually a set of laws. Okay, it's part of the patriarchy. Capitalism is a modest evolution of feudalism, which is a modest evolution of slavery. And what capitalism is doing is it is giving people with the right contract, the appropriate contract, the authority over other people, and much more disingenuously, over the Earth's resources.
Yeah.
And any kind of moral compass or sort of view on Earth's resources suggests that they are common resources to be shared, not just among humanity, but with all life.
Yeah.
And I think that's the real problem, and you see it starkly today, and maybe it has always been stark, but it just seems to be accentuating as the extremity gets further and further away from us, of the lads at the top actually owning the planet. So you have a handful of people who actually own the planet, and they don't own it because they have taken it. They own it because we have agreed to let them have it.
Yes.
And so what is the justification for capitalism? I'm not sure. I'm having a little think of it these days, because it's certainly not some kind of morality. I think it's justified on some sort of meritocracy. And we say, oh, well, if that person is jolly good at what they do, they should be appropriately rewarded.
Yeah.
Okay, so that sort of resonates with an appropriate value of quid pro quo, which everybody has. We have that idea inside of ourselves. Unfortunately, that meritocracy is not in fact happening. It is not that the good people rise to the top. Often it is rather the opposite. The good people sink to the bottom. It is not that Jeff is the best at what he does. He's just been the best at manipulating. Unfortunately, the whole system is so corrupt by its own internal mechanisms that it really doesn't have a hope of helping us. I was watching a recording of a meeting at which Mark Carney was a principal panelist. And he's obviously got a fabulous perspective on what's going on in the world of money. And I invite you all to go and have a look at it. It's on the security and, what was it? It's on a GlobeScan website, so it's very recent talk. But what was interesting is that he was, despite his eloquence and I think his virtue, he was having a difficulty trying to close the circle between the problem facing us and the likelihood of being able to corral the resources of the big companies and big individuals that are going to have to really, really change the way they behave. If we have any chance, and he is saying this himself, any chance of slowing the disintegration of the biosphere. And I just don't think that under this current set of laws, which is what capitalism is, it's nothing, it's not moral, it's a set of laws which we are agreeing to let those people control us. I don't think it's going to survive unless we step back and give it a jolly good shakedown.
And yes, so is the shakedown going to come because the system itself is inherently going to collapse? And out of that collapse will come something new. And what is then your relationship or our relationship before the collapse or during the collapse or even after the collapse? In other words, what does any individual do in their capacity to alleviate or to remediate or to mitigate what is actually going on? I mean, obviously, if you're building a house and you're farming, you're doing some of that already. You are doing it. The question is, to what extent is that itself? I mean, it's the right thing to do, but does it have feet, sufficient feet and footfall to make a huge difference to what is going on against the power of institutions and capitalism? And that's the question. That's the question that I ask, because, we can all individually decide what we think is right and to try to deal with it. But how much authority do we have as individuals to really make a change before a collapse really occurs? Because it isn't just a collapse, I think, right now, of humanity. It's a collapse of the entire natural world.
Of life, yeah.
The collapse of life itself.
Yeah. We have a little sticker on the fridge, which somebody thought was a bit harsh. It says, "Life!" exclamation mark. Do you give a shit about it?
Yeah.
Because that's the situation we're in today.
Right.
And 20 years ago, yes, I thought I might influence these big institutions, companies, and all the rest of it. I came from that world. I could present quite well, had a fairly reasonable pedigree, blah, 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 blah. Well, I don't think I can at the moment. And the only reason that I have any sort of hope is that at COP26, I think everybody got the message that the institutions are not going to change, that they are not able to change, that they are unwilling to change. Governments, companies, whatever it is, the organization, the way of education, the way of food delivery, all of these things are not going to change by the vested interests. The only way they're going to change is by individuals taking action. And that has been pushed off the table to date. Right? People have sort of said, a bit like Brandon was suggesting, individuals can't make a difference. And Brandon, like many of us, comes back and says, I'm going to do my little bit and maybe it will help. Okay, and that's partly the position I take. And similar to Brandon, it's sort of like, well, if people look at me and see that, okay, he's still doing okay, maybe I can change. I look at my classmates from graduate school, and they must think I'm completely potty, wearing, hand-me-down clothes from my grandparents and digging the bogs, right? They must think I'm completely mad. However, I'm not yet divorced, and I still talk to my children, and I eat the best food that money cannot buy because you can't get it, and And I think that possibly my quality of life, despite my meager means, far exceeds their existence, because they're divorced and, you know, the kids are off somewhere else, and, you know, and so on. So it's individuals have to make the change.
While Tom is coming back on again, I'd like to say I think he's doing a wonderful job, and you all are, and I think that's what makes a difference. And that the circle has to spread. Many more people are taking this a great deal more seriously than they were, and we just have to keep up the pressure. And I think things will change. I think mankind is quite clever at adapting, and that we will find a way. I mean, one of the things that we've been trying to look at is in the field of education, and I think that's an area where we can all make some impact, because if we can educate people the right way, that is the future. And as we get older, we need the young to be doing that. So I will hand back to Tom now. Thank you.
Sorry about that. I could hear you. We just lost power on the camera. I didn't realize we'd been going so long. How exciting. I did hear the word education. And that's my father just speaking there. And he has been, he and my mother, I want to include them both because this is a team effort. And they both bring essential qualities to the work that they have done of educating bright children who in poor countries who otherwise would not get an education. And it's a tough process, and they do it on a shoestring, and they've had tremendous support from wealthy people around the world predominantly. And as a rule, the education system is the system that's in place. So that's what these children are exposed to. But I think the education system has to change in a fundamental way, and that is part of the system change that we are facing. And educating people in the way that I was educated is not going to provide a solution, because I am learning the same mistakes of my forebears. I am learning to be in control of other people, right? I went to school with David Cameron and Boris Johnson, and look at them. Frightful, frightful people, right? Get away with murder. And that's been going on for centuries. The privileged who have the education make the decisions about other people's lives. And that is not education. Education, in the very word, is telling people what to think. Human beings came out of nothing, came out of monkey land because they were able to work it out for themselves. That is our capacity to learn, to think ideas. And that is why we need an education which nurtures that capacity rather than dumbing it down. So at that very fundamental level, it was very difficult in this country because the learning is largely by rote. Carmel, who's on this call, is a pioneer of, let's say, learning, helping people learn for themselves, follow their passions. Nurture, provide them with the opportunity, provide them with the space to do it, and then give them coaching or training. Peer learning, teaching others, is the way that we learn. And until we face up to that reality and really just step back and say, oh no, what we've been doing is wrong, we must change today. Whether it's the education system, the health system, the banking system, the systems of government, we know the systems are better, the ones that we're not using. And we just have to move forward as soon as possible. And unfortunately, the best way to do that is for the incumbent leaders to change themselves. So when I was in the financial services industry, I said, okay, well, I am going to change. I'm going to be an ethical investor. I have designed an investment arrangement which puts me in the same position as the people who are putting the money into the fund. Right? So we have coherent interests. At least that way I'm not defrauding the very people I'm working for. Well, at the moment, that is how it happens. Right? And you know that, Ivan, because you're close enough to the industry.
Are we being effective in that? That's my question. Being effective
In what?
In changing the institutional mindset that you find abhorrent in many respects. How effective are we in changing those institutional structures of investment that you have tried to deal with in your own capacity and knowledge? Are we just still sitting in the status quo, or are we really changing and challenging and finding alternatives?
Are you talking about me, or are you talking about people?
Well, it's you, or more generally. I mean, are we on a kind of fool's mission here, believing something that is not actually taking place, or do we really see evidence of systemic change along the lines that you're talking about?
No, absolutely not.
I would agree. Yeah.
No, absolutely not. That's what I'm saying. There is no systemic change. There is a lot of lying.
What do you do about it in the educational system or the institutions?
Oh, it's very simple. You show people the other way. And that is why I have been very privileged and honored to have been able to talk to Carmel and hear her life story. And that will be our next video posted if I can get the post-production done. But the outcome is amazing, right? Because her children are amazing people. They are the kind of people that you want to meet, who do things, make music, fix people, whatever it is, and they understand relationships, and they're courteous, and they understand work and food and things like that. You don't learn that in a privileged prep school or university.
Yeah.
Right? Trump went to Wharton too.
So would you say that Greta Thunberg is an example of the sort of person that you're talking about?
Yes, although I would love to have a little chat with her, because I think I could expand her perspective as well. Right? Because she's trying desperately. It's all about walking the talk.
Yeah.
It's no good telling people what to do.
Yeah.
Because that's what's been being done for millennia.
So have you invited her to your program?
Ivan, I'm a very cocky lad, and I try and invite everybody, but usually it ends up in the junk.
Okay. Well, you have to be hopeful. I mean, would she be a good person to have and to interview, for example, from your perspective?
I think so, because if nothing else, she has a lot of people listening to her.
Mm.
And if one can introduce other ideas through her, then those other people won't necessarily see her as a figurehead. Because one of the problems with our system is figureheads. We do not take responsibility for our own actions. We follow the leader.
Mm.
And that's no good. I mean, look at the insurrection in America. Oh, Trump told me to do it.
See, that's actually an interesting thing, because I read this poll, and it was something like 52, 60% of the global population. How you do a global poll, I don't know, would actually prefer a dictatorial person in charge than an actual democracy.
Mm.
That they want somebody up there to go like, oh, this is what we're going to do,
Mm-hmm.
and we're all going to do it.
Yeah, but that's because everybody who says that thinks that the person in charge is going to look after them and get rid of the neighbour whose dog keeps shitting on their grass.
Exactly. But it also goes with like Greta Thunberg.
Yeah.
You think, okay, well, Greta, she's doing this, da, 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 da. And I suppose really kind of...
Gandhi's the honest leader.
Well, yeah, Gandhi's good. There's a lot about Gandhi we probably don't know as well. Like,
yeah, he was a lawyer. That was a bad thing.
I don't know. He got bet up a lot.
Oh.
Especially in South Africa.
Mm-hmm.
But like the nice thing about Greta Thunberg is like we can see her as this like figurehead of like, okay, here's Greta and she's saying these things and da 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 da. But I think you have to think about where she first came in, which was basically a girl sitting in front of government buildings with a sign.
Yeah.
Very DIY.
Yeah.
And there's more and more people that are just going with, I'm going to do the DIY thing. I'll share the DIY thing with other people who might be likewise interested and stuff like that, and they'll learn a little bit. And that's an educational type of a thing. Instead of saying, well, this is what you have to do, clickety, 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 click, it's more kind of like, well, what are you interested in? I have some knowledge about this. I will share that with you that you're interested in. And then maybe, hey, I'm interested in this. This person over here is doing this. I'll go talk to them. Like one of the, I suppose, I'm just going to relate this back to another story in a way. Like, I would have had a lot of friends back in the States that all worked in fine arts bronze foundries, right? And there was a particular guy, and he's now a fairly successful artist and stuff like that. Like, but his whole idea was, I want to pour bronze. I want to do metalwork and stuff like that. Instead of going to the art college to learn that, I'm going to go get a job in the foundry. And so he went and got a job in the bronze foundry and learned through experience and other people pouring bronze and doing how to achieve what it is that he wanted to do, which is a very DIY type of a fashion. And I think, like Greta Thunberg, you can think, okay, well, you know, she's talking to the UN and she's doing this, she's doing that, how do I do that? Really, like, you have to go back to where she was, which was just a girl sitting on the curb with her sign, DIY, I'm holding this sign up.
I like that. One thing which she does, which is consistent, even though she's in front of the UN, which I really love, she talks straight. There's no bullshit.
She says what she wants to say.
She says what needs to be said.
Yeah, exactly.
You guys are lying.
Yeah.
And that is the job of the press. And they are not doing it. I mean, look what's coming out about the BBC at the moment. About how they basically abdicated their role as an impartial observer of society. Right? And all of the flipping press secretaries of the, what's his name, Johnson, May, Cameron, came out of the BBC and they manipulate what comes into the news. Oh, talking about what comes into the news, manufacturing consent. Noam Chomsky and Edward S. Herman. I mean, we are living with this just deeper and deeper. Watch the movie if you don't want to read the book. It'll make you cry.
It's like the idea of, well, especially, I know I keep relating to the States and stuff like that, but the big thing in the States, the liberal media, the conservative media. And it's like nobody really realizes that the vast majority of the media is owned by the same companies. Liberal and conservative. And there's very few people that actually think, well, maybe the CEOs of these corporations and the wealthy are using the liberal side and the conservative side to split people and put people together. It's very much like, and I always kind of like I was talking to my dad about this, Star Wars. What was the Emperor doing in Star Wars? At the beginning of Star Wars, he was playing the Republic and he was also playing the Separatists. He was playing both sides of the battle. And he came out in charge in the end. He knew exactly what he was doing. There's a very simple concept with the idea of divide and conquer. We will use the media. There's no such thing. They're all owned by corporations. There's no such thing in my mind as a liberal corporation.
Yeah.
They're all about making money.
Yeah.
And so henceforth, they're going to present this or they're going to present that. And it might divide people and stuff like that. Also, a very common thing with the idea of the BBC and the idea of the press secretaries and stuff like that. That happens quite a lot because
lobbyists.
You can invite people to come to your event and stuff like that, but it works a hell of a lot better and you're a lot better to get in print if you just actually write up the whole tag for them and send it in, and the journalists then just post it and put their name at the top of it. Same kind of
Democracy now. That's the independent news source in the US, which gives us 10 minutes of realism every day. Usually quite depressing, but anyway. No, it's, good insight. Thank you.
Yeah, I know.
It's,
DIY, I think, is...
on the subject of corporations, a couple of quick, one idea which is nice. The alternative to the corporation, which I think we have to move towards, is the member-owned enterprise or the worker-owned enterprise. And in those, and then they're much closer to partnerships, but everybody is an equal partner. You have a membership, and so you have a participation in the running of the organization. And of course, the other interesting aspect, which is a step closer to the current corporate structure, is the diversified stakeholder group. And I think you've seen that, Ivan, in River Simple, where they have reps on the board from the various stakeholder groups. So they actually have employee rep, they have customer rep, they have supplier rep, and so on. So that movements in that direction are healthy. And I would say that the technology is out there. You mentioned, you go to the lad and he shows you how to do the brass foundry or a bronze foundry and so on. And I mean, in this day and age, that's kind of how I exist. I mean, everything that I do, I picked up on the internet. Or by watching, Noel or Jerry or one of my friends doing it right and learning. Like, even last week, I got a pane of glass cut from a broken pane of glass. I went into Carlo Glass, said, "Can you cut this?" The lad went over onto the table and cut it. And he said, "Oh, that was really cool. I didn't realize it was so easy. I'm sorry I didn't see it." So he takes me over and he shows me how he did it. And the insight was, after you've scored the glass, you lift it up rather than push it down. And that makes the break come clean. So just so, you learn from the internet and from your community. And that's learning. It's creating knowledge inside of your head instead of the delusion that somebody can pour it in.
And so what do you think that Ireland in particular has to offer in this whole discussion? Does it have anything unique that is of particular value?
I think I don't think anything is that unique, but it's certainly got some interesting history, which I think resonates with other cultures and communities, because it's a colonized country and it's a country of community, and because we still have a vague memory of our pagan past where we had local communities interoperating within themselves and with other local communities, which is reflected in the culture today, because we do put a reasonable value on a bit of crack and a bit of taking things easy. We're not so uptight. So those sorts of aspects make us palatable to other communities who might be therefore more interested in listening to what might come out of Ireland, rather than America or Britain, the great colonial powers, or Holland, or wherever it is. But I think the challenge with that very question is this idea of nations, because nations are a part of the problem, as John Lennon said in Pam's poem at the beginning. Nations are not a helpful designation. They're completely unreal, and they're just an excuse for fighting. Whereas communities are very relevant, and the global commons is very relevant. At those two levels, that's where we need to focus our attentions, not at this nation idea or this corporate idea or whatever it is. And I mean, that's my view.
Yeah, I think you'd be very correct on that, because at the end of the day, it's like, at this point in our evolution as a species, as a culture and stuff like that, like, it is very global. And we're not going to escape that. I mean, a long time, even just a few thousand years ago, if there was a horrid plague, if there's a horrid plague in Europe, it wasn't really going to affect them too much in China.
If they even heard about it.
Yeah, and that population is going to keep on going, Or in America with the Native American. But then eventually it did kind of go that direction. But now, whatever happens here affects over here, and affects over here, and affects over here. And you have to think locally, but at the same time, we're all earthlings. You know. And this is where we are, like, and I'm like, okay, we can shoot off with, like, you know, Elon Musk and go to Mars. But then what are you going to have? Where are you from? I'm from Mars. Where are you from? I'm from Earth. Okay, yeah, all right. You know, and really, at the end of the day, it's like, oh, well, we're all human species. We're all from the same planet. We're all here. And we aren't going to be able to escape, no matter what, this idea that me here, and Tom here, and Pamela, and you, sitting here in Ireland, are interconnected with people over in the States, interconnected with people over in China. We're all interconnected. And it's just the way it is now.
Yeah. I think for me that came clear in, was it 2004, the tsunami in Asia? And for me it was a great example of what I call the noosphere, which is basically the brain of the world, everybody being connected, everybody knowing stuff at the same time. Because within 2 days, there were blankets from Ireland in Asia. Just like that.
Yeah.
Because people care and they wanted to help and they knew about it. And the internet is helping with that. And you know, education, as my dad was saying, the fact that people can read and write, you know, and have basic skills. We're connected. I mean, it's kind of funny even now today. The mobile phone is in everybody's pocket. You know, you may be a refugee from Colombia on the Mexican border, but you have a mobile phone. And without it, you don't survive.
Yeah. And with that mobile phone, not is it just a phone, it is a little mini computer that provides this type of connection that we're having here, and connections with lots of other people in there, which is, in a lot of ways, it's a great tool. And it has been used that way. But we're all interconnected. There's no way of getting away from that anymore. Like, you can't just say, well, grand, I'm an island in and of myself, and I'm going to hunker down in my little spot in Carlo, and I'm going to do my little bit here, and the rest of the world can just falter away, like, because it's just not going to happen.
Yeah,
you can't isolate yourself anymore.
Yeah, there's garbage on the top of Mount Everest. Nowhere is sacred.
Yeah, exactly.
The good thing is everything's going to be all right. Trust us. We know, right, Brandon?
That's right. Everything's going to be good. It's hunky-dory. Trust in David Bowie.